Christine Schneider, the Visceral Voice.
Welcome to the Visceral Voice podcast. I'm your host, Christine Schneider. Every 2 weeks on this podcast, I talk with voice specialists, manual therapists, health specialists, psychotherapists, movement practitioners, and professional voice users about voice science, function, medication, movement, puberty and aging, and everything in between. I am on a quest, not only to become a better manual therapist, but also to learn everything I can about the living, breathing body and its intricate connection to the voice. This podcast documents the continuation of my learning and my experience as a professional singer, a nutritional consultant, and a manual therapist. Join me every 2 weeks as we strive to provide current, knowledgeable, creative, and compassionate information to help restore, regain, and create happiness and success in your vocal journey. In this episode, I have a conversation with Andrew Byrne. Andrew is a voice teacher, a vocal coach, a composer, performer, and music director. He has twice been named one of the favorite vocal coaches in New York City Backstage Readers' Choice Awards, and is also a frequent contributor to their expert column. Andrew was a singing coach for The Real Things, starring Ewan McGregor, Maggie Gyllenhaal, and Cynthia Nixon, and The Bridge Project, directed by Academy Award winner Sam Mendes. His Broadway and off-Broadway conducting and keyboard credits include Les Miserables, I Love You, You're Perfect, Now Change, and A Class Act. He has such a passion for travel and bringing his style of voice training to other countries. He has taught at such organizations as Victorian College of the Arts in Melbourne, Australia, American Music Theatre Live in Paris, the Shanghai Theatre Academy, the Banff Centre of Performing Arts in Alberta, Canada, the Danish Actors Association, and the Danish Academy of Music Theatre. He was named the first ever cultural envoy to Belarus by the U.S. State Department to be the vocal coach on the first ever Russian language production of Next to Normal. As a composer-lyricist, you can hear his songs, you can check out his website. Andrew does it all. In addition to all of this, he is an expert in applying the principles of athletic training and performance neurology to the world of singing. I had so much fun recording this episode. I hope you love it as much as I do. Here you are, my conversation with Andrew Byrne. Hi, Andrew. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so excited to have you. I wanted you on this podcast. I'm so thrilled that you are here. I have to admit, when I hear people talk about your method, I want to be a little fly on the wall and I want to watch all of your lessons, or I want to plug into your brain and upload all of the information into my head.
Well, we're gonna plug it in this call. We're gonna get as much into it as we can into my brain.
Yes, awesome. Amazing. So, Andrew, you are a voice teacher, a vocal coach, a composer, a performer, and a music director.
Yes,
you do it all
those things. I do a little of a lot of things, but yes. But my main thrust of my business is in teaching technical singing. So that is the main goal of mine, is to work with performers at a high level, get them to an even higher level, and let them do what they want to do in life as well as they possibly can.
That's great. And you have your Master's of Music and Vocal Pedagogy from Arizona State University,
Arizona
right?
State. Yep. So I studied vocal ped there. I did a performance degree, but it was with a pedagogy kind of emphasis.
Great. So part of what separates your teaching from other voice teachers is your in-depth knowledge of neuroscience and your brain-based training.
Yeah.
So when did you first start studying neuroscience, or what led you to study neuroscience?
Yeah. So my path to it started with trying to fix myself. So I was an injured musician. I put myself through school. I paid for my school by paying for voice lessons. So I considered it to be sort of an old-fashioned apprenticeship. I would come early to the lessons. I would come take notes on the vocalises the teachers were doing with the students. It's how I feel like I learned to work with women, to know what to do with their voices. So I was often coming, and trying to absorb as much as I could in these lessons. So my job was to play the piano. I'd always been kind of a natural at that. My teachers along the way in piano had kind of just been like, you sound great. You got big hands. Let's do Beethoven. And so it was just kind of like I was playing, a lot then, and all of a sudden really spending a lot of hours at the piano. At the same time, I was trying to get a music director career going for myself. So I was also conducting shows from the piano. And I was had for a couple of years been having some off and on elbow pain in my left, which I had been ignoring. And then I was on 6 months of contracts out of town, 4 different shows. First one was Ragtime at North Shore Music Theater, which was my dream show to do. It's one of my very favorite musicals. So I was in this, contract at this great theater. I was the assistant conductor. I was so excited to be, playing da 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 da. I was like, this is going to be amazing. And then I really started having a lot of pain in my elbow in that job. Bad enough that I kind of didn't know what to do. And so looking back on it, I did some stuff that probably wasn't that smart, including bracing my elbow to try to support it while I was going. And then progress on to some other jobs. The pain started to get worse, and I started to have a lot of nerve symptoms in my hand as well. I would get tingling in my left hand. Mm-hmm. I was getting pain in my shoulder. I was getting, I would be done with the show. My left hand would be bright red, and my right hand would be a normal color. So it was pretty concerning. So after this course of shows, I was back in the city. I took a half schedule. I cut half of my teaching and just focused for a while on fixing myself. I came to Alexander Technique, which I had studied a bit before, but became very serious about. I studied it for 12 years. Along the way with that was amazingly helpful, but started to also get really interested in athletic training. I did Pilates and gyrotonics, which was also very useful for me. I'll share that I have a history of a hernia. So I had an inguinal hernia on my left side when I was 4, which looking back on it, I think had a lot to do with why I was having some left side problems with my arm. So it was interesting that studying Pilates started to really help me as well. Mm-hmm. So once I started to find abdominal strength on my left, it was weird, but my elbow stopped hurting. And so all along the way, I started to go, there's like a lot to this athletic stuff. I started to research who I could study with as a voice teacher, not being a PT, who would let me come take classes. So I worked with Gary Gray, who's a PT. I worked a little bit with Tom Myers, who did anatomy trains. Mm-hmm. I did some yoga anatomy courses, got very interested in that type of thing. I did something called muscle activation techniques, which is something the Denver Broncos use, football kind of thing. Yeah. So I started to study all this stuff. And that was it was 2001, 2002 when I was having this. So for the years after that, I started doing that. And then bringing that into lessons. And then I have a student who is a trainer with a company called Z Health. It's zhealtheducation.com if you want to look them up. Mm-hmm. And she said, I really think you would like their stuff because it is, it's like what you're doing, but through kind of a different kind of lens, a brain lens. And I said, that sounds good. So she started training me. That was in 2013. She trained me privately in some of their methods, and I became really interested in what it was doing for my own body. So then I started to take classes. And so at this point, I've taken their entire curriculum many times over. One of the great things about Z Health is that Dr. Cobb, who runs it, feels that education is such an evolving thing, especially neuroscience, which has completely changed in our knowledge over the past 20 years.
Yeah.
So he updates every course every time with whatever the latest research is. So he allows you to, once you paid for the class, to come back for free whenever you want. So a lot of these courses I've taken 3 and 4 times to make sure that I'm updated with the most current stuff to share with my students. And so now I'm just finishing up what's called their Master Practitioner Program. They've just implemented that. So I'm going to finish that this summer. And so I've taken their entire sort of path and lived with it for quite a few years now. And that's kind of how I ended up in that world.
Yes. So you started studying with one of your students in 2013 who was
Correct.
A trainer, and then you moved into their program all the way up. Now you're a master practitioner of Z Health training.
That's right. Yep.
So what were the most interesting things that you learned in that program?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously so much, but I think some of the things that are the most changed my perspective the most were how much the nervous system really leads everything. It's really in charge of our whole life. I had done a lot of time working biomechanically and muscularly, which is super valuable. But I started to look at all that kind of training through the lens of what is the brain learning in any of these movements? How can we be smarter about how that is affecting the brain? A lot of the Z Health curriculum is devoted to parts of the brain that are considered reflexive, that are often not trained in other ways. So if you read, books on the brain, it's often talking about hemispheres or things in the cortex. A lot of the Z Health curriculum is devoted to what's called the cerebellum, which is the little brain. It's in the back of your brain. Cerebellum is about 10% of your brain's weight. It's over 50% of the neurons are in your cerebellum. So it is an extremely metabolically active part of the brain in just about any body process. So we do testing of the cerebellum and look at how to work with that. And the cerebellum is responsible for, it's called the ABCs, so accuracy, balance, and coordination. So we're looking at how we can get better at that. And I apply that in singing with people who have stuff like, I have trouble doing runs, or I have trouble being accurate with pitch, or any of those things. That is to some degree a cerebellar activity. So looking at, can we find ways in our physical training to upregulate the cerebellum and then see what happens, say, in, a fast scale or something like that, or a riff that someone's trying to learn. Then the other area we look at a lot is the brain stem, which is where your brain meets your spinal cord. And that's where a lot of the automatic processes in the body live, and looking at how to assess that and how to even assess it in posture and in gait and how people walk. So we learn what pattern someone with a brainstem issue is going to have in their walking, how that will look, and then also a cerebellar pattern. So you never have stared at as many people's butts as you have when you do this training to see how their tailbone moves, how their limbs move. So we look at that, and then we use that as a way to kind of assess how the training is going, how effective what we're doing is. And so the terms we would think about are like a first brain versus a second brain. First brain meaning the old, reflexive part of our brain that's always asking the question, is this safe? It's really looking at safety. And then the second brain is this, more where conscious thought happens. And the main job of your second brain is to inhibit your first brain, to inhibit those primal impulses we have. It's kind of like if you haven't eaten, you might get hangry. You might find yourself being like, why am I yelling at this person? Because my second brain hasn't been fed and it can't stop my first brain from kind of jumping out. My thing is when I'm super tired, I will cry at anything. I'm like, I don't even know why I'm crying, but I just haven't slept. Yeah. So there can be those things that kind of come up like that. So I think that's one of the most interesting parts of their curriculum. It's really nice to get ways to look at these subconscious processes in the brain and the body.
Mm-hmm. And you did mention a couple things that you did with you were mentioning the cerebellum and the accuracy, balance, coordination. And you mentioned doing some melismas and scales and riffs and kind of, working with coordination on that. Are there other ways that you transfer what you learned with Z Health into voice training?
Yeah. So the nice thing about it is that Z Health is really just a lens to look at performance through. So it's honestly very easy to transfer it because they apply it for athletes, but to me, performers are athletes. So there is zero difference in the mindset. I mean, anyone who's done shows knows that it's it is an athletic endeavor. Mm-hmm. It is a question of stamina. Do I have the ability to get up and do this as frequently as I need to do it? It's a question of how does my body energy? Am I overshooting? Am I undershooting? And so I don't see any difference from an Olympic athlete to a Broadway performer. To me, it is the exact same thing. Yeah. So it's the most applicable, honestly. And most of the other physical training I've done, I've had to make more mental leaps on it. But because the essential thing here is to look at performance through a neural lens, it's such an easy transfer. There's really no difference.
That's so great. So how would you go about educating your students who many of them probably don't know very much about neuroscience? So how do you go about educating them with a brain-based training approach?
Yeah, so there's a couple simple processes that we're going to use in any kind of session with me. So I do both courses on this. My courses are called the Singing Athlete. So that is the name that I use for them. So I teach that course through Jen Waldman Studios and also on my own across the world. This year I've taught it in Switzerland and Australia and a lot of other countries, other years. And so I do work in those courses, which is usually a little more fast-paced, sort of a masterclass style, 15 to 20 minutes per person. And then, of course, in a normal lesson, I usually do an hour. So it's a little bit of a slower pace, but it is the same process. We just call that an assess, reassess process. So how that would work is you're going to sing Defying Gravity for me. We're going to hear where it is. I'm going to watch you and listen to you and say, this is what I am seeing in terms of what parts of the brain don't seem to be pulling their weight right now. Let's do a drill for that part of the body or the brain, and let's see what happened. We're just going to sing it again then. And the one difference that I like to use is that I like to have someone singing within 5 to 10 seconds after we've done the drill, because so much of this stuff is, again, happening below our consciousness, that I like to do something and then have someone kind of immediately be singing to see what happened, to see what occurred for that person on a reflexive level. And so that would be the assess, reassess process. And then I use 3 basic outcomes that could happen from that. So let's say, someone is singing that piece and it cracks on the F. You go, okay, we have to work on that. So we do something, we do it again, the F flies out of their face. We go, cool. That would be, we would call a high payoff drill. Whatever we did to get you there, that's going to be your high payoff stuff, which lowers the threat in your brain. So there's this, sense of like, is it safe? Like I said earlier in the call, that improved your sense of safety. So your throat said, cool, we feel like this is okay to let this sound come out right now. And that would be a high payoff exercise, something where the threat went down and the sound therefore improved. And that would be what I would coach someone to do before they go on stage, or depending on what the drill is, even while they're on stage. So I do a lot of vision work with people. So often taking a strong eye position will be a great option for somebody if they're, singing something really hard, to go like, look where your visual field seems to enjoy being. And that would be something we would call high payoff. So another possibility is that we're doing it, the F doesn't really come out, we do a drill, the F actually gets worse. And that would be what we would call a rehab drill then. So that means that we have somehow subconsciously increased the threat for the brain. Mm-hmm. And that is something that we do want to look at then, because as you know, in like any field, but certainly in theater, you just kind of never know what you're going to be is thrown at you. So there's nothing that we would do in a physical or, sensory way that should cause that. But if it does, we've stumbled onto something that for whatever reason, your brain is finding a little scary. So then it's about, how do you modulate that threat? How do you get that person from finding threat there to having it be more to test better for them? So I tend to have people do rehab drills as well, but at different times. So if we find something that's high payoff, I say we're going to do that right before you go on stage or while you're on stage. Your rehab stuff, we're going to do that separate from performance by at least an hour. So you can work on it in the morning, work on it before you go to bed, sometime when you're not feeling like you need to get yourself into a high performance state. But we're going to try to turn rehab things at least into the third possibility, which would be a neutral drill, something where there was no perceived change positively or negatively. And if we can turn rehab stuff into either neutral or high payoff things, that to me is good training for someone. It's lowering the global threat that they are experiencing in doing this very high level athletic thing.
And do the drills vary per outcome? So if you have a high payoff, well, you do the drills before you actually have an outcome. Is that correct?
Yeah. So basically it would look like this. We would go, you sang, I'm going to say, hey, we're going to do this circle with your elbow. We're going to do the circle. I coach someone through it. And then I'm like, cool, try it again. Oh, it worked. Okay, great. So that means that you remapping your elbow joint in this moment gave you a lowered threat. It gave you something where your brain felt safe enough to let that note come out. Maybe before you go on this week, we're going to try a couple elbow circles and then you're going to go do your show. So we're basing it all on whatever happens in the moment. And the cool thing about singing is it's one of the most accurate assessments of what's happening in your body, your spirit, yourself, because it is so visceral and so central in the body that it really sends up some very clear results, usually of when you're on the right track with a high payoff or a rehab exercise.
Mm-hmm. And how do you choose? Do you just choose by looking at them what you
Yeah.
see that's kind of holding or?
So that's where the training would come to go. I like knowing what to look for.
Mhm.
And so that is certainly just based on what I'm experiencing and honestly some instinct of like, it feels like this is going on. But I'm always ready and often am wrong where I think, well, I thought that was going to be amazing and that didn't work. But just knowing how to look at that and go, okay, that wasn't what the brain needed in that moment. Let's try to pivot it this way. And to me, that's actually what I love about it, because everyone is so different, and it is impossible to be bored in what you or I do. Every body is different. And so it's such a gift to me because it feels endlessly fascinating. You're catching me on hour 35 of a teaching week, and I enjoyed every hour that I spent. It was just all great because everyone responded differently to similar stimuli. And to me, that's like the great fascinating part of it, is getting to work with different nervous systems.
Yeah, definitely. And do you use tools or props as well in your training and in these drills?
Oh yes, I got tons of crap around here, but
Oh my gosh. Which one do you,
yes,
what tools do you feel produce the best results? Or I'm
yeah,
sure they differ, really.
yes, of course. I mean, it is super individual, and if you sat with me for a week, you would see probably like everything would work for someone. The things that I think are most interesting for singers to think about are vibration. So I have a bunch of vibration stuff. I have a vibration plate, which some of you may have used in the gym before. It's like just basically creates a full body of vibration. I have hypervolt, which is like a pretty intense vibration that you can create. You can do what's called 2-point discrimination with that, which is basically, can you feel two individual prongs of the vibrator, which tell you kind of how well mapped a body part is. When you can feel two, you're like, I've got a good map there. When it feels like one, that's a blurry area in your body. So you can use that for kind of checking that quickly. I use something that's called the RezziMax, RezziMax, which is a great sort of multifaceted vibrator that you can use in the mouth. So you can do a lot of intraoral vibration work with that, which can be really awesome for people. And the basic reason why I think that stuff works is that singing and speaking, of course, are complex vibrations in the body. So having that woken up, assessed, looking at where someone is currently feeling something or isn't feeling it can, for many singers, be extremely high payoff. And then I personally love vision work. So I have a lot of vision tools in the studio. I find vision really interesting. I find it very useful for performers because often you are blocked to say, you have to be on this mark by X beat in the music, but rarely are you told you have to look at this. So it is nice to get to figure out where someone's visual field is. About 70 to 90% of posture, depending on who you read, is controlled by vision. So if somebody has, constantly been told, hey, keep your head back, you're sticking your chin forward, your chin's coming forward, and they've like been told that for years by teachers and nothing has changed, my brain is going to go, there's probably something going on with the visual system that hasn't been assessed. And vision is so much more trainable than often we are told that it is. So I find that to be another real love of mine. So working with color, working with strobe glasses, working with what's called pinhole glasses, working with hemi-field glasses that activate one or other sides of the brain. Lots of fascinating stuff you can do with the eyes.
Yes. This is amazing. I've never
Cool.
I've never had a lesson with you, but I
know,
hear
come.
about all of these, and I've taken one of your singing athlete day courses.
Yes,
and
I know.
I'm like, oh, well, this is so fun.
Anytime you want to come on over.
Yes. Part of it when you were describing some of the vibration exercises, I would think also help you to come into the present moment, which can also help with that nervous system and
Amen.
parasympathetic system and
Totally. Yeah. And just for people to think about, and why all these massagers have vibration, we have this dorsal column in our spinal cord, which controls what I said, 2-point discrimination, but also vibration and light touch. So that is the part of the spinal cord that is supposed to be creating this parasympathetic reaction. And so the more we feed into that, the better we should feel, the more present we should feel in the work. And so it's one of the great things that you are, of course, doing for people as you're working with their bodies, like you are providing them that stimulus. And that's why they leave your sessions feeling so, part of why they leave feeling so great. But it's nice to know, yeah, I can work with vibration in my body. I can like wake that up, become more sensitive to it. And that might help me drop into the work a little bit more fully.
Yeah. Okay. And so with taking these tools, how do you help a student that is seeing great results with the tool to move away from the tool while keeping or maintaining that same result?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'll just use an example from today. So we were working with some bone conduction headphones. So these are called Forbrain, Forbrain. They're really cool. They essentially feed your singing voice or your speaking voice back into your bones themselves. And that's part of what singers are using to judge their voice's bone conduction. So we were working in bone conduction in a lesson. The singer I was working with was having a really amazing result using these headphones. It was sort of fixing a problem that we had been looking for a solution for a while, and was kind of just given everything. So what we did was we chose a section of the song, and she sang it with them on, and then we just kept going back and forth. So we got on, off, and then things started to improve. And I said, let's now try it with your eyes closed. So we're going to turn the visual field off. So hopefully the proprioceptive system, the ability to feel yourself in space, will kind of kick in a little bit. And so when she closed her eyes and did it, and then took the headphones off and kept her eyes closed, it was a much closer match. So there was a sense of, okay, so maybe we need to like increase the proprioception in this moment. So we did several reps back and forth like that. Every time it was just getting closer and closer. And then eventually put the headphones on the piano and said, now we're just going to sing that section with none of this feedback happening. And it just started to lock in. So it is a process of noticing yourself, essentially. Even if it doesn't feel exactly the same, it's my opinion that if I can show you that something is possible, your brain starts to open itself up to it. It's the concept from exercise and athletic training of one perfect rep. So they will say, like, if you can just do one perfect rep of deadlift or whatever you're working on, it starts to feel more possible to your nervous system. And then the chance of you finding that again the next day are higher. So I look at these tools as like getting you to one perfect rep, at least opening up the possibility like this is there. It's not an impossible task. And then weaning off of it, or playing with sort of middle grounds that sort of do some of whatever that tool is, but, starting to work you into a more of a without it kind of situation.
Yeah, this is Joan later in her episode mentions something quite similar actually as with teaching with masterclass. And when you teach in a masterclass,
I heard that.
The student, if they go away and practice it right away, immediately, then their chance of actually keeping what they learned is more likely.
Yeah, I heard Joan say that. And what it made me think was that there's this there's a concept of neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to change. It's not good or bad, it just is, meaning that your brain can change with a bad experience or with a good experience, but it's more likely to shift in a heightened circumstance. So to me, the value of a masterclass is it's a heightened circumstance. You're singing for Joan or somebody who's, really well known. You feel that sort of sympathetic nervous system, that wake up happen. She gets a great result with you. There's a window of neuroplasticity after a time like that. So that's when you gotta, as she said, go into a room and do it a bunch of times, because you can lock it in well after something like that. But you have to know that neuroplasticity needs repetition, or your brain will not think you want to make the learning permanent. So I try to get people interested in doing their drills in every possible location in the city, every time of day. Because if you do not do that, your brain thinks, well, you did that in your lesson, but I'm not going to spend the calories on making that a permanent thing for you. So it takes about 25% more calories for your frontal lobe to create a new habit. So if you do not keep doing it as frequently and as in as varied of circumstances as possible, it will not become permanent. That's just the way the brain works. I am fond of saying that being a singer is a career of finding joy in repetition. You have to love to repeat forms. You have to be excited to get up and do your drills again, to do your siren again, whatever you're working on, because the more you do it in the more circumstances, it will become an autonomous part of your body, but you got to insist on it.
Yeah. So you did mention that, we're talking about master classes now, and you did mention that you also give master classes around the
I
world.
do.
This year
I
you went to
do.
Switzerland and
I love them.
Australia.
Yeah, I love doing them.
So, well, first of all, how do you translate them? Do you have to translate them? Do you have a translator?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's all different. So I worked in Belarus a couple of years ago, and I speak zero Russian. I learned how to say like diaphragm and tongue, and that was about all. So there I had a translator the whole time. I worked in China too, where I had a translator for the whole experience. I just worked in French-speaking Switzerland in Lausanne. I speak like some French, so I self-translated horribly quite a bit to, I'm sure, what was completely grammatically incorrect French. But I mostly spoke in English, and people just kind of, figured out, or someone in the class who was bilingual would help. And I worked in Paris too, in kind of a similar situation. And I worked in Denmark quite a bit where, really everyone's English is so flawless. And I love to like try to speak a little Danish, but it's definitely not. I'm not amazing, but I work often in Australia, which obviously there's no language barrier, but it does provide some interesting stuff to think about in terms of how Australians versus Americans posture themselves for singing. So it's really one of the things I love the most, honestly, is seeing music theater reflected in different cultures. It to me feels very engaging and exciting to see how other countries and other places kind of interpret the art form.
Yeah. And so do you see that vocal habits are similar, or do they differ in these other countries?
Yeah. I'm personally really fascinated with accent and with what that does for our brains and our mouths. Our tongue is such a big deal in the brain. So it's really interesting to see that. So when I was in Australia last year, I took a class in Australian accent because I was trying to learn about how that postures in my mouth. And, it makes you so aware of what we do in a sort of a New York kind of position and how different that is. And what is interesting about that, especially if you are singing, New York composer, is that they might write, say, an E vowel and think this is going to be amazing for this person. I love singing on E. Everyone loves that. And then the Australian E, which I'm going to do terribly, but it's something like A, E, A. It's a completely different position. And so I find that often Australian singers have trouble with that vowel, that it ends up feeling like not a pleasant place for them because the American writer has gone, it's going to sound great on this note. It's perfect in the range for an American. And then it doesn't necessarily translate because vowels are a pitch. So there is a note being rung as we do that. And there can be a little bit of modification that needs to happen, a little bit of rethinking of where to go in the mouth. And I'm always trying to keep myself learning something new. So I just was in LA last month doing something called Knight Thompson speech work, which I highly recommend anyone who's looking for voice and speech training for actors. And it was their company deals with sounds made in all languages. So we learned things from all kind of postures, including like click languages and things that are very far from an English experience. And I found that to be really fascinating to play around with because there is such an impact on the vocal tract from all of that kind of stuff. So it's been very fun for me to kind of play around with those shapes a little bit. But yeah, they're definitely, I think that's like the most obvious difference is just that there's, different postures going on orally for another country.
Mm-hmm. So with your neuroscience knowledge,
Yes.
if you could choose 3 things about neuroscience to tell every student and every listener,
ooh,
what would those 3 things be?
Okay. So I'm going to choose, first one I'm going to choose is kind of already said it, but let me make it definite. There's something called the threat bucket. So there's an imaginary bucket in your brain, and whatever happens in your day is pouring into this bucket. So you had a fight with your boyfriend. You slept 3 hours. You got up too late to eat breakfast. You grabbed a candy bar on the way out the door. The N train wasn't running, etc. So this is all just like everything's dumping into this bucket throughout the day. And your brain thinks that if that water reaches the top of the bucket, you are going to die. So it's going to create a spigot in the bucket. It's going to create some kind of outpouring from this bucket. And the most common output is pain. So obviously you will know this, that there's, so many performers are working through pain constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And that is one of the most common outputs of the bucket. The problem is that if you keep ignoring pain, like let's say you're doing 42nd Street and you've rolled your ankle and you're like, got 6 more weeks on the contract, your brain might go, God, I gave you a lot of ankle pain and you kept doing that tap routine every night. I'm going to try something else. And then it's going to create some other kind of output, which can include immune system stuff. So, people who've been in a long running show often come to me and say, oh, such and such illness is going through the cast. My lens on it goes, I wonder if the threat bucket is just kind of high for these people, and that there is, they've already, as a group, probably ignored physical pain kind of a lot. And that might be another output. And other outputs from this threat bucket could be something like a movement problem, could be something emotional like depression or anxiety, something to make you basically stay still like that, and certainly hormonal things. So to me, like the global goal of my own training for my own body, and also as I work with others, is to lower the water in the threat bucket. And that is where high payoff exercises should come in. So that should be reducing the water in the threat bucket. So if you know a little more about your own self, to go, when I do an ankle circle on my right foot, I feel amazing. I might want to do that when I start to have a really, really stressful day, so that I don't let the water start to spill over and have problems. And to use my own example from the beginning of the call, if I had known that concept back when I was having a lot of elbow pain, I probably could have treated that pretty differently in myself and saved myself a lot of problems. So that's number one. The second thing I would pick would be the idea that our sensory life feeds our motor life. Mm-hmm. So basically the way it works in the brain is we have a sensory cortex and we have a motor cortex. And the way the brain is organized is that all the signals go through the sensory cortex first before we get to the motor cortex. So the way I will say it to people is, if I can't feel it, I can't fix it. An example would be a teacher tells you as a singer, lift your soft palate. You go, great. If you feel your soft palate, well, that's going to work awesome for you. You're going to go, I get it. I lift my soft palate. I sound amazing. Listen to me. And that's great. It's also possible that you have a lack of sensation in your palate for whatever reason. You had a dental surgery, your tonsils were out, had a lot of throat infections, whatever. Something has happened that's been kind of scary, and your brain's response was, you know what? I'm just going to turn those nerves down. And then someone says to you, lift your palate, and you can't feel that. So you start to squeeze other things in your throat. You squeeze the constrictor muscles to be like, I think I'm lifting my palate, but you're actually doing something else. Mm-hmm. And that can create a real problem, because, the teacher might not know that that's how the brain is organized. And then there is only motor instruction being given to singers, which is not the whole story, in my opinion, at all. That is great if your sensory system is working, but having worked with a lot of people, almost everybody's got some deficits. You just have to know how to look for them. And so to me, I like to work sensory along with motor, meaning let's make sure you can feel the back of your throat. So if anyone who's listening to this wants to try, you can just gargle with some water and go, do I feel the left and right sides of my throat the same? Do I even have a sensory map of what it feels like to have water and movement on both sides of my palate? It's possible that one side will be stronger. And then you might want to play with your neck angle to go, can I find an angle where they even out? And I could do some gargling there before I do my singing to make sure I'm awake in that area, that I am able to move it well. I have to be able to feel it first before I can move it. And I got one more. So what my third thing I'm going to choose is that what your brain needs to stay alive is fuel and activation. So fuel for your brain is the following things. It is the balance of oxygen and carbon dioxide in your body. So you need a good balance of those things. It is not only taking a big breath, because many people who talk or sing for a living actually have too much oxygen in their body, and they need to actually build carbon dioxide. So it's really simple to test. If anyone wants to try it, this is how you do it. You exhale through your nose, you plug your nose, and you hold your breath, and you see how many seconds you can go. If you can't get to 30 seconds like that on an exhale, like you blow it out, you plug your nose and you hold your breath. If you can't get to 30 seconds, you're probably over-oxygenated. You're actually hyperventilating through your day. And that would be very good for you to be looking at correcting, because your brain needs a good balance of oxygen and CO2. And carbon dioxide calms you down. It makes you relax and it makes you focus. And I spent many, many years playing professional auditions because I liked being a spy and watching what people did when they got an adjustment. So I would watch the actor breathe as the director said, hey, can you do it again? And like this, whatever the adjustment was. And the people who hyperventilated, in my opinion, didn't hear what they were being asked really, and didn't necessarily take the adjustment very well. And the people who breathed more low and calmly through their nose often heard it better, and I thought took the adjustment better. So it can be that important because CO2 helps you focus. It helps you make sure you know where you need to be. So there's a great book called The Oxygen Advantage. The author is Patrick McKeown, Mckeown, if you're interested in learning more about that. But that's number one thing in fuel. So fuel is oxygen, CO2, and it is glucose from your food. And then the other thing that your brain needs is activation, which means that you got to activate every part of your brain. So that is why I do balance training. I do actual auditory training, like hearing training with singers. I check smell. I check taste in the tongue. I will check vision, as I already said. And I will check brainstem and cerebellum, as well as a lot of spinal cord stuff, to make sure that it's all being trained, because everything's got to be activated. You don't get to pick and choose. We have to keep the entire brain activated to be having the longest career that we can have in this and this the healthiest life. So it's smart to think this isn't only two little vocal cords in there. That's not how it works. They are part of a very, very large and complex system that nobody, certainly not me, fully understands. But we do know that the more things you activate, the better you do. So I like to get people interested in expanding the definition of what training is into some other areas of the body and the brain that they may not be thinking about.
Wow. Mind blown, Andrew. Mind blown. That is fantastic. So listeners, his three things were threat bucket. That was number 1. 2, sensory life feeds your motor life. And 3, your fuel.
Brain
and
needs fuel and
activation.
activation. Correct.
Yes. And we hear the power of the exhale all the time, but you just explained why, which is awesome.
You'll love it, you guys. Exhale. It's your friend.
Okay, we are going to move on to my rapid fire questions.
All right, I'm ready.
All right. What is some advice that you would like to give to an aspiring young performer?
So I'm going to say set up your space to remind yourself that you like to sing. Brains are really, really sensitive to visual cues, and you need to make sure that you remember that you like to do this and that you like to train. So that might be as simple as keeping your music book somewhere where you can see it, not storing your keyboard under your bed, but storing it somewhere where you're like, oh, right, I should do some scales. It could be also something physical to go like, I love doing squats, or I love doing resisted stuff. Maybe I keep a band or a kettlebell or a weight somewhere where I can see it, so that I remember I could be sitting on the couch watching Netflix, or I could get up and do 5 minutes of something physical. And that's going to be better for you in the long run. And you need a reminder, because it is your brains are very sensitive to whatever you're seeing. So if you're serious about doing this, you have to start to think like an athlete and go, what would an athlete do? An athlete has their form and their drills on their mind all the time. And so having some kind of visual reminder in your space, make a little post-it that says, sing, whatever you want to do, but give yourself something that reminds you that you love it.
What is your favorite quote?
I'm going to go with a quote from Dr. Cobb, who runs Z Health. His quote is, the body you have is the body you've earned through the way that you move. The body you have is the body you've earned through the way that you move. I love that because it gives me and everyone who hears that ownership of their own story. My elbow problem was about the way I moved, and I was able to fix it, and I've played for almost 20 years with no pain now, because I changed my movement. And so having that ownership of my own story and what happened to me makes me feel good. Mm-hmm. And it also makes those of us like you and I who care for people go, in the end, we're of course giving all that we can in the time that we're together, but it is up to you to move well. That's the goal in life. Life is movement.
Yeah. What is your favorite song lyric?
I mean, this is like, I have so many favorites, but I'm going to pick two that I love for different reasons. I love Fable from Light in the Piazza. My husband and I did a concert instead of having a rehearsal dinner for our wedding. And we had that sung at our concert. I just think that's one of the most beautiful and in its own way romantic lyrics. And for a totally different reason, I'm going to pick a Little Priest from Sweeney Todd. I just worked on Sweeney Todd in Switzerland, which was amazing. And this company in Switzerland did it in French and in English. They did A Little Priest in French.
Wow.
It's crazy. But I think that, I mean, there's so many brilliant Sondheim lyrics, but every time I hear that, I get like a little pissed at how good it is. I'm just like, how did you do that? Like, how can you be that freaking clever? And I'm not condoning putting people into pies, but I do think that that is a just truly genius level lyric.
Yes. Yes, it is. Who influenced your teaching the most?
Well, honestly, one of your previous guests, Joan Lader, is been an amazing mentor to me in my time here. She is an invaluable resource for the music theater community and is a truly brilliant teacher. The other teacher that I had when I first came to New York is, speaking of Light in the Piazza, Victoria Clark, was my voice teacher for many years here. Both Joan and Vicky have taught me so much. They are both truly amazing humans, and I owe a lot to both of them.
What is something new about the voice that you learned this week?
So I mentioned that I was doing Knight Thompson speech work. And so some languages use ingressive sounds like sucking in instead of going out, which I've played with on and off over the years. This isn't like brand new, but they reminded me of it. And so I've been trying this week to play with, can I do a pitch in and out, like go in and out on the same note, which I'm finding weirdly fun and kind of testing well for me vocally. So I'm playing with, can I do a pitch on the way in and a way out, the exact same note? That's my new little toy.
I love inhalation singing. I love it.
I do too. It's so fun. I'd kind of forgotten about it. And I was like, this is really fun.
It is. It's so fun. Okay. What is one tool that you could not live without?
I'm going to go two. Okay. So one is just because I think this is so interesting is I mentioned this briefly. I use what's called pinhole glasses. If you guys don't know it, you can go look it up. They're literally a piece of plastic with some holes in them. So I did them in a Z Health course a few years ago. I wore contacts and glasses for since I was in a junior in high school. And I put these on with no correction and it was like, well, I can read 20/20 with these on. Crazy. Okay. So I committed to reducing / eliminating contacts and glasses from my life. So I use them pretty rarely now. And I use pinholes instead. So pinholes they focus the light onto your retina. So you can, depending on what's going on with your visual issues, if you have them, they can be like kind of an amazing correction. For me, they work like a dream. So if I'm like far away at a show, I tend to use those instead. I get in amazing conversations at the theater with what I'm wearing, but they're pretty cool. So I definitely can't live without those. And I'm also going to say something very simple that I use a lot, which is a paper bag. So I mentioned CO2 earlier. So I talk all day for my job. So I use a paper bag. I breathe into a paper bag. I seal it around my mouth and my nose. I inhale and exhale through my nose into the bag. I pause at the bottom of the exhale. That builds carbon dioxide. If you've seen in like old, shows, people having a panic attack, they put a bag on over their mouth. You don't have to be having a panic attack to have it work. It just builds CO2. It calms me down. I do it before I go to sleep. If you can't get to sleep, grab a paper bag, put it over your mouth, breathe in, breathe out, pause, do a couple minutes of that. I promise you your brain will calm down and you'll probably be able to get to bed. So I find that to be a very good and simple tool to use.
What is one thing that you have on your bucket list?
So I am hopefully going to complete one of my things pretty soon, which is that I'm writing a book. So that's on my bucket list, but it's going to hopefully be out soon. Yeah, I'm actually announcing that on this podcast, Christine. I haven't even said that to anyone, but yeah, I'm writing a book. So I'm going to have that out hopefully in the next year. And my other bucket list thing is kind of weird, but I really want to go to Eurovision. I have like a complete love of Eurovision. Like my husband and I got like a VPN so we could watch it this year. like we love it. So I'm going to go to Eurovision at some point.
Yeah. Oh, Maybe both in the next year, right?
Maybe both. You never know.
What is the most delightful word you can think of?
I'm gonna go back. So I studied in Austria when I was in college, and my favorite German word is the German word for 12, which is zwölf. Zwölf.
Yeah.
Zwölf. It's really fun to say. I recommend it. Zwölf. Zwölf. You can
Zwölf.
just keep saying it. Zwölf. Zwölf. It gets more fun the more you say it.
It's so true. What is your favorite book?
This is hard. Like I don't even know if I can say, because I like books for different reasons. I will just say two that I have loved recently that are not like professionally related. I just read When Brooklyn Was Queer, which is by Hugh Ryan. It's a fascinating history of LGBT world in Brooklyn from the time of Walt Whitman up to the present. It's awesome if you like queer history, which I'm super interested in. And I also, in the fiction world, just read Less, Less, which is by Andrew Sean Greer. That is a hilarious and also very sweet and romantic book about a professor who he finds out that his ex-boyfriend is getting married. And so he accepts every possible offer, like everything that comes his way. He's like, I'll just go do it to like get out of town. So he ends up in like all these random places teaching or like doing some kind of weird gig. And it's just like a very sweet and a super funny and well-written book.
What are you currently learning?
Well, I kind of already said it, but the thing I'm mostly doing right now is just trying to work on accents with Knight Thompson stuff. I'm also taking tap on Sunday. So, you know, I tap with my friend Kathy Callahan. So I'm going to take a tap lesson.
Yes.
Because you can't be in a bad mood when you tap. It's actually
so true.
impossible.
It's my favorite. And
Yes.
yeah, I've heard one time, I do not know if this is true, but I do know that you're a runner like myself.
Yes, I am.
Now, I have heard that taking an hour tap class is the equivalent of running 5 miles.
Oh my God, I believe it. Like I'm like a sweaty mess after a tap lesson. I'm like, how have I like worked this hard, but yet had that much fun? Like I totally believe that. And I'm going to take that on and share that.
Yes. What do you wish that you would have learned sooner?
I think I sort of already covered this, but basically I wish I had learned that pain does not equal injury and injury does not equal pain. That I was in a lot of pain in my elbow, but actually like I just needed to like find my abs and move things a little differently. And I was fine. So I will just say that pain is real scary. It feels really real. It can be really real, obviously, but chronic pain is often just your brain kind of freaking out. So just knowing that it doesn't mean you're actually injuring yourself more as you're moving. I wish I had known that because I was so scared to move my elbow, and moving my elbow, among other things, was what actually fixed it. Mm-hmm. So just the idea that you don't need to be scared to move. A fear of movement is always a bad idea. So I wish I had known that.
Yeah. Good. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
If the listeners want to get in touch with you, Andrew, what is the best way to do that?
So my website's just Andrew Byrne, BYRNE.com. I have a Facebook page for my studio where I share stuff, Andrew Byrne Voice Studio. I have Instagram @SingingAthlete is me on Instagram. But you can find me on my website. I got a bunch of online stuff. I wrote some songs you can listen to, lots of fun stuff.
This has been absolutely amazing, Andrew.
It's been so fun. Thank you so much for asking me to do it. I had the best time.
Thank you. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your willingness to share.
Oh my God.
And thank
Pleasure.
you for your love of knowledge and your continuation of studying and training.
Well, it is my honor. And if I may give you a quick shout out too, Christine, I often refer people to you, and invariably they're like, oh my God, she's a goddess. She's a queen. I mean, you've been called like every name of royalty in the studio that you can imagine. Like you get really good reviews. I will just say that. So you are obviously doing an amazing and incredible job yourself. And you are certainly a treasure in this community. That's for sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you again for being here. I have really learned so much in this hour, and thank you for your time and for sharing everything.
I've loved it.
Thank you all for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, please tell your colleagues, your students, and your friends. Please subscribe, rate us, and write a review. You can find us on Facebook at Lifelight Massage, and you can also check out my website at lifelightmassage.com. Please join me next week for another wonderful conversation on the visceral voice.